Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I know we've got a tight timeline today. Welcome to our Second Sunday's art program. We feature artists discussing and showcasing their work, projects, philosophies, and approaches. During this time of pretty tremendous isolation for our elders, we offer this virtual programming to enrich lives and help to continue promoting connection with one another, which is so important. This program is sponsored by Sage Metro Detroit and the Hannon Center. Sage is a local affiliate of a national organization, which is the largest and oldest organization in the country dedicated to improving the lives of lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender older adults. We offer trainings and workshops, food and tech delivery programs, and virtual events like today's to build connections. And the mission of Hannon Center is to preserve the dignity and enhance the quality of life for seniors in Michigan. The Hannon Center offers a comprehensive array of programs and services, including support groups, their K-Rod Gallery, Active Connections, and the Beyond You series, which facilitates creative aging classes and workshops that provide social interaction, personal enrichment, and intellectual growth. And now on to our featured artist, Scott McDuffie. Starting as a factory worker and evolving to a director of corporate transformation, Scott only recently began his in-depth exploration of art. Like many of us, he found his creative passion again later in life. Scott brings the same climbing the ladder exuberance, experimental approach, and collaborative nature into abstract expressionism. The colors, textures, and gestures in his industrial and urban influence canvases reveal his desire to figure out the rules just well enough to playfully break them. I love that. As he lifts other artists and builds community along the way, enjoy the process and journey of Scott's energetic paintings as well as his new art life. I am pleased to introduce you all this afternoon to Scott McDuffie. Welcome, Scott.
Yeah, thank you, Carrick. Thanks for the great introduction, and thanks for all that you and Sage are doing. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I will take you on a little journey with me, a little bit about my background and various connections to how I arrived at this reinvention of art. And then I hope, as Carrick emphasized, that we can focus on community and have some good dialogue and some good energy exchange. As mentioned, we really need to utilize these types of things, these alternative ways of communicating to make sure we're all safe and yet have that sense of community. So with that, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share my screen, assuming I hit all these buttons right. And we will jump right into, and please, as you see this, think about questions that you can bring up later, but kind of the primary theme, the thing I hope that you look for and see as I share this is this idea of embracing reinvention. So that's something that I think we all can look for opportunities, and I want to share some of my examples that maybe inspire you as well. So I have an interesting background in that, oops, for some reason, there we go. As Carrick mentioned, I didn't start out as an artist. Well, I'll come back to that in a little bit, but mostly what I've been, if you look at the first 50 years of my life, has been a factory worker. I grew up pretty simple beginnings, grew up in a trailer park. I kind of was hungry and wanted to be, making some money, figuring out a better life. And so I started working in factories. And in fact, you're all getting now a sneak peek that only visitors to my studio have seen. I'm actually designing and painting an entire series based on my factory background in life. So you're some of the first people in the world, that sounds exciting to say it that way, to see this art. And so if you look at the piece on the left, it says systems in the upper right-hand corner. That speaks to both my very first factory experience was in office furniture. It was called the systems plant, but it's also all these interconnectedness of computer systems, people systems, and processes that I've now become director of transformation for. So I work for about a $3 billion company. I work with 15 different companies that include everything from factories to banks to sports. And I'm the person who helps develop leaders, helps them listen to their people better, map out their processes, create engagement so they're doing continuous improvement. We talk about continuous improvement and respect for people. So making sure people have meaningful work in a way that serves customers and gets profitability and growth, but really energizes the workforce in a transformational way. The painting on the right, just a quick aside, I think speaks a little bit to the reinvention concept. That's kind of the lone Scotty here on the left. Within that shape of the factory in the bottom, there's a whole bunch of people represented by these little slashes on the right. There was a lot of folks that came in with incredible degrees and MBAs and great potential. And I actually worked my way up to be an executive from the factory floor. I had to repeatedly reinvent myself and learn more and figure out better ways to communicate and different ways to lead that would bring the organization up. And I kind of rose with that. So yeah, I've got a lot of factory background. And frankly, during that time, I wasn't focused on art or anything really creative. I was trying to climb that corporate ladder. And interestingly, Richard Reeves, who's out there on the call, hi, Richard, he challenged me some time ago, and it was a bit of a leap for me because he asked me to be part of a celebration, an art exhibit around grandmothers. And so I actually created this abstraction that was similar to a piece my grandmother painted, likely even before I was born. And so this was the piece that was actually in the Hannon Center. Now, what's interesting is even though my grandmother was a painter, she was a figurative painter, and a real enriching part of her life was going to these classes and, making the landscapes and the old man of the sea and these various paintings. This is my grandmother here at the top right. You might notice that my grandmother might have been a little unorthodox. In her mouth is a cigar. There's some whiskey in her left hand, and she was as strong of a factory worker. They ran a farm. They had a bar in their basement. They were wild, fun, crazy people. So yes, she did make great pies. And I remember helping, collect everything for that. But she was a real adventuresome person that I used to sit on her knee as a little boy and help her finish shading in certain paintings and helped with her crafts that she was huge into. So I really think that was an inspiration. Similarly, my father was really into photography, loved beauty. He was an outdoor sage, and he could tune into small objects, a little mushroom on a tree, or the way the light came through the forest onto the water, and he would embrace that and energize and speak about that very fondly. Despite again, not having any formal art training, he just was an appreciator. And I think that is part of my legacy that brought me to art as well. So this isn't an actual picture of me on the right, the cute little boy there in front of the computer screen. But when I was that age, I wrote poetry, I scribbled cartoons, I had astronaut wallpaper that I would put I create my own comic books and create all these scripts, and this was very, very creative. But as I mentioned in the last slide, that was kind of taken over by getting caught up in the factory and climbing the ladder, and I'd gotten away from that really all the way to the age of 50. And the last thing I want to mention around why art, and maybe even speaks louder of why reinvention, this is my crew there. Those are my two daughters and my new son-in-law. And so one of the things that I thought was really important is to model for my daughters at any age, whether it's career whether it's where you move. I'll talk a little later about going to Detroit. You have this chance to reinvent yourself, to not be in whatever box people might see you in, and a chance to do something daring and new. And the way I think of it is to dare to be a rookie at something. So this rookie concept is strong for me. So I keep telling people there's no better time ever in the world, even facing a pandemic, to become an artist or become a musician or try something new. This whole be a rookie and reinvention. And so part of the reason it's such a good time is you can watch YouTube, you can look things up, you can do conversations like we're having right now, not even being in the same space, that we can keep learning from each other. And in these pictures are examples of people that I learned from greatly. On the left is Jonas Gerard, really strong, famous artist in the North Carolina area. Unfortunately, he passed away just a few months ago at the age of 79, but he was a mentor to me. I was actually helping him with business strategies and mentoring some leadership techniques. And you look at these pictures, he would draw a whole audience and do live painting performance. I'll mention some of that I'm starting to do now myself, but that's what I want to do when I grow up. If I ever kind of grow up, I want to be able to perform, get the energy of people, and really be able to express that community in ways that are powerful visually. And to the right, this is Jody King. Jody's my other mentor, and I say the powerful thing is to look for mentors and connect with people, particularly when you're a rookie, that already are doing what you want to do, that have similar philosophies. So as you can see just from Jody's outfit and sticking fingers in a bucket, she was playful, she had energy. There's not a lot of overthinking and worrying about perfect. It was, both of these artists have a real trust the process, which I'll speak about in a little bit as well. This energy that happens that's very intuitive, that doesn't necessarily require, as Carrick said, that you know all the fine rules, but a lot of it's just about self-expression and letting yourself go. So looking for mentors that have a similar philosophy as you're a rookie, I think that's a key takeaway too, I think, for reinvention. So as I mentioned, this process is important. So I like to emphasize play in the process. So whether it's scraping and using big hardware tools and unconventional things that you might not see at an art store, or this is my guy Prince down here in the lower left, that I use music and intuition and not try to overthink it, kind of like dancing, to let that energy just happen. It's really a great place to play with abstract expressionism. You can see on the right there, another advantage of this playful style is to bring other artists in. Those are three of my art friends. They're all part of the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club, which I'll emphasize again when we talk about community. But they bring good energy, and I like to create an environment where you can make a mess on the floor, you can spray things with water, you can not worry about cleanup. We just throw everything in a bucket, and we get help getting that cleanup long afterwards. So it's really be in the moment, play, and I think it's key mental framework that can be helpful for a lot of the things that we do, a lot of things that we want to do with reinvention. So place can be really important as we reinvent ourselves. For me, I found, and some of you are likely familiar with the Russell Industrial Center. It's an old factory, and factories are where I kind of feel best, the grittiness of it, the rawness of it. And I have a space there that I just love. In fact, if you look at the picture on the right, it's evolved to kind of studio, lounge, there's a gallery wall, there's racks of inventory, there's packing station. It's a pretty good sized place, and a place for me to help make visitors feel comfortable, see the art, understand the process, and again, have a sense of community and connection. So Detroit, like I said, I came to art late, and I came to Detroit late, but I got here as fast as I could. And so I have embraced, I love the flavors, the culture, the architecture, all these great things about Detroit, the murals, the music. On the left there, that's from a mural that's right in along the cut that I walked down to the riverside. And believe it or not, the lower right-hand picture there, that's actually the view from my window. I live in Eastern Market in an old beer factory. Happens to have tall walls and a lot of brick, which is great for showing art. That was a prerequisite when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to live. I wanted to be able to display. And once we get on the other side of vaccines and everything that we should be doing, it'll be a great spot to bring artists and collectors together as a sharing and community footprint that has this incredible view that I know it inspires things in my art, including, you can see this version of my logo. That's me trying to do an abstraction of the Detroit skyline. So let's talk more about community. You might see some faces in here you recognize. The Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club is a huge part of what has been embracing me and connecting me to this art community and to Detroit. There's wonderful mentors. I've had a chance to exhibit my work. And this kind of down in the lower right section here speaks to a recent art performance that I was able to do. A friend of mine raising money for a women's veterans facility that helps with people in transition coming out of the military. They're redoing a floor. They wanted some art there. They're raising money. And so Erica actually threw and created a street jazz festival a couple weekends ago, 4 bands. And during the time they were playing, I was dancing around, playing, splashing paint, and I actually created 5 paintings. You can see the one kind of bottom center that's yellow. That was one that was raffled off and that money went. And then the big one in the lower right-hand corner that the young ladies are painting on, that one actually I think that's the one that was donated to go into that space. So great energy, powerful to be a part of, and it's great to get kids involved. Part of my mission is to make art accessible, and that means letting people get their hands dirty and not over worrying about the outcome again, so they can make a connection even as children. So one of the things that I've been really working on for this last little bit is actually assembling and creating a team. So DeLorean on the far left is really a digital strategist, marketing, social media stuff, and also does video. Maybe some of you that have seen my website or some of my social media, I'm doing like silly Mr. Rogers videos and cool things to introduce the website and try to get people engaged and show my process. A lot of that comes from DeLorean. Heather, upwards in the center, she's doing website design. She is putting together the brand package and a whole bunch of other strategic things. Monica does the accounting, keeps the book side. Amanda on the right here, she's my right hand in the studio assistant, working through things, transition, keeping inventories up, and she does a lot of special things for me. In the lower right, thinking of team, is the idea with reinvention that often we need advisors. So I mentioned having a couple mentors, but I'm also part of these art business mastermind groups. That's just a small portion of the people that I interact with. That was actually at a reunion event, so only about half of them were there. But we talk business practices and painting techniques and a whole bunch of other things that reinforce us. And in fact, through social accountability, kind of nudge us forward on each of our own reinventions. So a quick snapshot of some recent work on the far left, set against this cool, I just like factory stuff and gritty walls, against this light green wall. Those are actually 3 of the pieces that came from the jazz performance. Keep in mind, I painted those rapid fire, high energy, to the music. And in some cases, I was actually dipping my fingers in the paint and playing almost like a keyboard across the canvas, using my brush like it was the base, and creating some good energy there. I do various things that are looking at the painting in the middle, that are pushing paints of different viscosity, mark making, trying to create energy, most of which is very intuitive in the moment. And I also, the ones on the right are kind of the other side of that extreme, where those were pre-mixed colors, often just one or two prime colors that I'm mixing with whites and grays and blacks to create a whole spectrum of values that make it more harmonious together. It's kind of like we're all going to play a jazz riff in the key of C, but as long as we stay in that key and those chords, it will energize. So really happy with some of that more recent work. So there's some work. I think if you look at Richard's background, you see something very similar as what you'll see on the left. It's kind of a strange thing because I tucked Richard into hanging one of them as a big diamond. So I actually flipped the script vertical in the picture on the right to see what it looks like. It's pretty cool. But the dynamic of painting in squares is that you literally have all these different wonderful orientations that you can use. Another thing you may notice about my work is these are not signed. I typically sign them once a collector picks them up or picks them out, because I can sign them in the corner at a diagonal. I can find the rotation that they prefer, because it is very intuitive, and people like, it's like instrumental music without lyrics. People create their own narrative. So somebody may walk into a room and go, oh, I see a face, or I see this that resonates with something in my life. This is a way that I can really make it customer focused, collector focused, is by signing it once they decide. And I even have a collector that's involved in the St. Louis Museum. So that it's in St. Louis, who rotates my work every couple of weeks to a different orientation, just to have a different experience with it. So it's fun. I love abstract. To me, that's part of that ability to reinvent around it, was its accessibility, and the idea that maybe there's not just one right answer, that there's many different ways to be intuitive, to share things, different tools, and to keep trying. So what's next for me? And I just have a couple more things. So start to queue up your questions, and I'm excited to engage with you. The next thing for me is this real industrial factory series. I showed you those first two paintings. Again, this is all top secret. So these have not been unveiled to the public. They have not been displayed. This is the third of many, many. I'll probably paint 40 or 50 paintings in this series, and then based on what gallery chooses to support, or maybe I'll even find a factory space to present them. Which would be really fun, right? Wouldn't it be cool to see factory art inside of a factory? But this is another one of this series that is, again, a lot of color mixing, a lot of playfulness, a lot of really good energy, but kind of factories abstracted. And what I'm amazed at is how personal many of these are. There's little stories. There's one that even speaks to my father's coaching me, saying, Scott, go to college so you don't end up in the factory. And yet instead I followed in his footsteps. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that's really bubbling up from my history that I didn't really anticipate. So besides the series, which hopefully will come out maybe in another month, on display at a gallery, but certainly released at least on social media and website. The other big thing that I've got going right now is a big techno event. So I just mentioned I painted for jazz music. My next thing, I'm actually going to be painting for electronic music. A director, an orchestrator, actually from Miami, I think a former Detroiter, is coming up and putting together a big event that's going to have art installations, music, DJs, high energy stuff. And there's going to be, I don't know, it's like 10 or a dozen different performance painters. So I'll likely be up near a stage, up near a DJ, creating energetic painting as the music helps to create that pace and connection. So that's going to be May 22nd and 23rd. And for your reference, or if you're interested, it's actually called Still Loading, which speaks a little bit to reinvention. It's kind of like, in many ways, we're kind of hesitant and we need to let some things break free and move forward. And then, so yeah, I guess my final, thoughts, you can see some, some general philosophy and thinking here on the right, but I invite you all to really embrace reinvention. That could be little in your life. It could be big in your life. It could be something that's really transformational. But know that by engaging others, by trusting the process of not having to worry about, trying not to worry about perfection so much, you can create some newness and transformation in your life that I think is particularly important and poignant to our times right now and what we've faced socially and with the pandemic and being shut in. And I was just hearing some data about the amount of COVID cases presently. So there's a lot of things that we may need to do differently, including calls like this that bring us close together. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I invite your questions. I'm excited to talk to you. What questions do you have?
Well, Scott, a few people have actually asked questions in the chat session.
Super.
Let's see. There's a question from Vincent Tilford. He says, it sounds like you're still in corporate America. How many hours do you spend creating art every week?
Oh, wow. Yes, I am. I still have a corporate job. And sometimes it's starting to mean travel again. I tend to go all around the US. I go to Europe to work with companies. I even go to Asia. The fall before last, I was starting to travel to Vietnam as well. So when I'm at home and doing my virtual office during the day, I would say that I spend probably about 9 hours a week on average at the studio. And that could mean 9 hours all at once on a Saturday. It could mean I sprinkle in working with Amanda. We usually work in 3-hour blocks together once or twice during a week. And there are times, particularly when I'm traveling, and travel gives me the advantage of seeing new things, going to museums, talking to other artists, that I come home so inspired. And even looking out the window seat I always get the window seat so I can look out at the terrain and the sunsets and the landscape. And I often, as soon as I get on in my car, I zoom right to my studio and go paint, because there's some energy and some inspiration that comes through. Thanks for the question, Vincent.
Michael Madigan wants to know, can you show us some of the non-art store tools that you use to make some of your details and textures?
Yeah, let me see if I can do that by looking at that previous slide, and I'll try to point them out. I'll share my screen again, and then I'll certainly talk to them. Let me see if I can get this up quickly. Can you see my screen again?
Yes.
Whoops. It says it stopped. Let me try that again.
Yeah, you need to share again. We can see it now.
You can see the overall. Let me try to find the process slide, or this is helpful too. So in the bottom middle, on the left hand of that 4-panel section, you will notice that I have like trowels in my hand, things that you would normally use to smooth out concrete or do gunite if you're putting in the ground pool. So those are things, or drywall, or you might use sandpaper on some of those. So I'm creating, again, often playing with different viscosities. I have some great paint, some golden acrylics and Nova acrylics that I'm pushing and pulling and using. I also use scrapers. I use, cheap, big one of my primary things, if you look at these brushes, I have some in the lower right of that 4-panel section. I'm using foam, I'm using sponges. I actually even take my blue shop towel and push paint around with that, as I recently did in my jazz. I have antique utensils. I go to the dollar store and buy kitchen gadgets, spatulas, squeegees. I even have, I don't know if you can all see my hands, but I have like drywall rubbing tool that I just drag. They're like 25, 30 inches wide. So I'll just scrape and play. And, you know, my thinking is, in a little bit more, if I may take that question to a little bit another place, that I really just want to trust the process. And in the process of painting, there's a lot of ups and downs. And at some point, you start to really doubt the painting. And gosh, as humans, a lot of times, sometimes we start doubting ourselves. And so there's a reinvention as part of that, that sometimes you need a refresh and a scrape off and, you know, just really change it up. And I like to think of it as purposeful disruption. What do I need to do now? Crazy with a color, or find the wildest tool that nobody would use and be playful with it to see what happens. Another great question. Thank you.
Marguerite wants to know if you are a trained musician.
Trained musician? Nope. I would love to be. That was actually, as I think about reinvention and being at a certain point in my life where I wanted to try new things, the idea of guitar was really appealing. I actually have a couple guitars around me. That was really difficult to do when I was traveling as much as I was pre-COVID. And then I picked up a paintbrush, was kind of my second iteration of that, and totally fell in love. And now it's engages my mind. It's a sense of community for me. I love mentoring and helping other people kind of through that change process, through playing with art in my studio. And so not a musician, but I would say a lover of music. And I utilize music to help me be playful and not overthink my paintings, so that it becomes a very authentic self-expression.
Yeah, the reason I ask is you seem to have a rhythm even in your movement, even as you're presenting and as you're, you know, like the avant-garde musicians, and even in your instruments as you create. So that's why I asked that.
I take that as a great compliment. Thank you.
It was meant.
Yeah. There was another music question. Does the music you listen to help decide the colors you use in your paintings? And she says, and Sandra also says, I love your philosophy of embracing reinvention.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for the comments on the philosophy. I would say that the music more likely impacts the gestural nature rather than the colors. There may be some influence, but mostly like dance, or as just indicated, maybe even how I speak. It's the music is helping with how the energy flows and helps create the movement. And sometimes it's helpful to have, you know, part of the composition stuff is to have subtle and kind of mixed background and little echoes of the colors that eventually may fight for space and push and pull into the front of the canvas and be an expression of a focal point. So sometimes it's useful to start music kind of slow and it's kind of mood and background, and actually have kind of a crescendo, like in music, for your painting, so that there's bits of it that pop out at you and literally, you know, help become three-dimensional in a two-dimensional space. That whole idea of push and pull, and letting colors and shapes gain what they need, whether it's some place for the eye to rest or some way that draws the eye in a focal point. I see a lot of that at play.
Vincent Tilford also had another question for you. He says, what gave you the confidence that you could reinvent yourself?
Ooh, that's a really deep question. Maybe I have a room of therapists in the room right here that could help me with that one. You know, I think it goes all the way back to my childhood in a general sense. I was a very, very shy, quiet kid, didn't really fit in with people. I had my poetry, I had my little drawings. And at some point, I created my first reinvention. And a bit of that relates to what I was saying about finding mentors and modeling after people that are doing what you want to do. And this is maybe more personal than the question was intending, but I had a very quiet, mother, and my father was really loud and boisterous, maybe more like I am today. And I had to kind of choose what path. I needed to understand what worked for me and figure out my own voice by experimenting. And I think there's a bit of, if many of us ask ourselves, why do we paint? Why do we do something visual? It's maybe that we need to get that out there into the world, get that into public, and maybe even it's a form of getting an affirmation. So some of it for me is probably, that shyness and trying to overcome that, and then being a little bit of a ham now and a show off that likes the attention. And visual arts are a way to do that, to get a big part of you and dare to be vulnerable and put that out into the world is a pretty big leap. And confidence is a great question, part of that question just asked. And I really think it comes from a mindset. I think maybe even related to what was just said about the rhythm of how I move, you need to change your physiology. To change your physical state impacts your mental state. And if you can really embrace that and dare to take risks and realize, oh, things didn't really fall all apart, or that A to Z thinking didn't really come to be, that things got that ugly, then you can kind of build on it, starting with little experiments to do some bigger and bigger reinventions. Move to a new city, try something new, pick up a new art form. I think that's all within our realms. And I think there's a key thing around, I'm sure I'm going to misquote this, but Picasso kind of said we're all born artists. There's a bunch of that's, I believe, in us. And it often is conditioned out of us, or we're told that's not the right thing, or maybe we got, somebody said something back in school, or a teacher kind of put something down. And I say, break those rules. You are the boss of you. Take that energy and try something new.
I have a question. What advice do you give for people who say, I'm just not artistic. I could never do that.
Yeah, I guess my advice is to not force it, to find your own thing. And, I think of art broadly. So how we dress, as somebody mentioned, sometimes how we communicate, how we organize our kitchen, how we, the food we choose to eat, the things we put together, the experiences that we share. To me, all of that is a form of art. And so when I speak of reinvention, I'm using my visual art as a platform to explain it, but I think it applies to really broad things. And so, yeah, it could be crafts, it could be knitting. My grandmother, who I emphasized earlier, she made the most incredible Christmas ornaments every single year that were so personal that my kids and I still put up what we call the kids tree to make sure we celebrate all those special handcrafted things. So find your voice, find your niche, and know that it is art as well.
Scott.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for your high energy presentation. I really enjoyed it. But my question is, do you title your work? And if so, why? Or if not, why?
Great question, Glenn. Thank you. So it's one of those answers. It depends. So sometimes there's a thinking, a motivation, like my industrial series. I kind of put some guardrails on what I'm going to paint and what I'm going to share and present. So there might be a name or a working title that happens in the beginning, but I would say 75, 80% of the time, I'm painting totally from intuition. I don't know what it's going to look like. I don't even know when I start it what colors are going to be in it. And if at that point, what I find is often the painting sort of names itself, sometimes even much after I paint it. sometimes the painting via intuition, the painting is actually telling me something I need to know about myself or about a situation or about the future that I can't even interpret at that moment. And sometimes that actually comes from the framework of others. I'm a big person to not want to be the lone artist. And as you know, Glenn, I'm pretty involved in the community and connecting with a lot of folks and bringing people in. And so somebody often will see something and draw that out, and that I might really connect to and based on that. And there are other times the far extreme would be I purposely don't name it and I let the collector, similar to where I sign it, I let the collector actually help come up with the name in collaboration.
Good idea.
Thank you.
There was another question. Sandra said she noticed that in a few paintings you've used text. Is it for a visual element or do the words have a meaning related to the painting?
So the words behind? So the words are often how I start a painting, and scribbles. Part of it, and I teach this when people come to my studio, there's something very daunting about a big blank canvas. And the first thing I want to do is mess it up, knowing that I'll likely add layers and other things will fight for space. Maybe even then I'll paint all over it and keep adding layers. But often I start with words. The painting behind me, it's a little hard to see from this angle, but in many different directions, and it's covered up, it says, walk 1,000 miles. And it speaks to kind of love at a distance and making connections and what we would do for each other. Sometimes that's, there's reciprocity, sometimes there's not. Sometimes you could walk 1,000 miles and still be caught by a 6-foot distance rule that you still can't get that close to really embrace and connect with people. So this is kind of an example of words and lines, and you'll see things coming through from the background. I think of that as all the backstory. And whether I cover that up or not, I think that the energy is in the painting, and that's part of it. I just shipped a painting a couple days ago that if you looked really close, you would see the number 19 all over it in different directions, which stood for COVID-19. If you could peel back the happy layers that it ended up being finally in a painting, you would see words like misunderstandings and wrong information and some of the stuff that we were going through early in the COVID cycle that I was literally painting in my kitchen studio. I put a garbage bag across the top of the counter and I was painting little bitty, small paintings that had a lot of words and a lot of energy. And sometimes I choose to let the words live and resonate through. And sometimes they're just part of the backstory that I think has energy when it goes out to a collector for an adoption. What other questions do you have? This is fun. I hope you're having fun like I am.
Hey, Scott. As you kind of talked about reinventing yourself and sort of this encore career, one of the things that I wonder about is that sometimes older people who've been defined by, their career, and they have kind of worn in some grooves in terms of who they are. And now they're trying to reinvent themselves. And what advice would you give them for how do they now go about finding mentors and sustaining themselves as they kind of move on to this next stage in their life?
Yeah, great question, Vincent. So I can really, from my own experience, it has been helpful to embrace the internet of things and being able to connect that way. Look for things that are maybe similar to art or things that appeal to you. And then find mentors from that, reaching out, daring to ask questions is useful. The first part of your question around, definition by career and history, I think is a tricky one that we might all have our own journeys on. for me, I've been pretty good at being able to kind of put that in the box. I recognize that this is one part of who Scott is. This is a part that I still want to celebrate, and I think that's an important part of my identity. And yet, gosh, what if I could do, all these other things? And I think that also grows in bits and pieces through experimentation. So I'm not sure I'm doing a good job, Vincent, of speaking specifically to your question, but I think I'll go back and mention this as a thought, that the trick is that we often think we have to be perfect. We often think that if we're going to try something new, we compare ourselves to others. And instead, we should build community with others and dare to be a rookie. I like that phrase that says, and I think of it in painting. That's why I start by scribbling. Go ahead and give yourself a permission to make an ugly painting, and you might be surprised at how well you do. Give yourself permission to step off and try a new aspect, a little bit of reinvention, and you might be surprised the difference you have. We tend to overestimate what we think we can do within a short period of time, like a year, but we tend to underestimate what we can do 5 years out. And so some slight changes of direction make all the difference in destination. So we a little bit need to trust the process and get away from perfectionism.
Yeah, that was very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the questions.
Scott, sort of like following, this is Marcia, what Vince was saying, listening to you, you're a process guy in one part of you. I mean, that's what they pay you the big bucks for,
Right.
in the factories and everything. And then on the other side, you're not afraid of a blank canvas. It seems like two different worlds.
Yeah.
And so do you have any insight, or maybe you want, how do we take advantage of the way your brain thinks in terms of process to reach people who could and might be great rookies, but they don't know it. They don't know how to do it. And even create that spark that says that might even be good for me, rather than hold on to that process. You do both.
Yeah, that's really insightful, Marcia. So for me, let me try to uncouple that in a few little sections. So many of the people that what I do in corporate America are engineers. And I apologize in advance to any engineers in the audience, but often they think in terms of, disciplines and structure and standardization and things, not always relating to people. And I think what has made me successful at the corporate approach is really to focus on the people side and the process side in a way that's very creative. And so I try to, whether it's in my art or when I engage teams, to help them come up with how they could, their ideas to make their process better. I'm trying to get them to not focus on the outcome. I want them to understand their current state in a way they can all gather around and articulate it and make it visual. It's similar, that's what it looks like in business, sometimes mapping out processes or brainstorming and capturing many ideas. It's analogous, I think, to all the screenshots I take of Instagram photos and studying other people's art and taking workshops. I went to the Museum of Modern Arts. I went through like an 8-week workshop where I studied Rothko and Pollock and all these. So I like immersed myself and studied post-World War II abstract expressionism in a way that I almost like feel a part of that movement. So there's some immersion. So that first part of it, I think, is, a bit of trust the process and engage people, which may inform the second part of what you were asking about and help me, Marcia, but it was like people who may not realize that there's a spark or they're not looking for the spark. How do we engage them in ways that, create some newness and maybe enables them to see a process? I can't speak for all of us, but for me, what that means is often inviting people to my studio, asking little questions. When I see a spark, helping people embrace that. to try new things, asking open-ended questions to help them articulate how they might take it forward versus telling them what to do. So there's this wonderful, and that's kind of my process method in business and in art, is to do less telling and more asking, so that people self-arrive at their potential solutions, or even help them articulate what their vision might be, and then say, so Marcia, what do you think the next step would be? And who are the people that are doing that already that you might learn from? And what might be a bite-sized chunk? In fact, of that, what could you do by tomorrow? And help kind of teach them problem solving and management, whether it's art, whether it's work, other things. I think we can do well by not feeling like we have to have all the answers, but just to ask some insightful questions, because we want solutions to have their fingerprints all over them. We want that energy to come in a way that maybe has a little nudge from us, but in a way that really helps them to figure it out for themselves. Did I cover most of what you asked?
Yeah, it was a question without any boundaries, really. I think,
okay.
Which is really a challenge. And thank you for.
Well, and I love no boundaries. In fact, just to take off on that, if you'll notice, even in the art behind me, I tried to paint off the edge of the canvas. So many of us, particularly when I work with figurative artists, and they come to my studio, and I hype this whole magic studio thing, and I give them fresh perspectives, and I talk through what my art looks like to teach them composition. Many people kind of paint within the lines. And so you see like almost this frame happening around a canvas because they're protecting it. And if you look at even the art behind Richard and his screen there, I don't know how, if you might have to scroll the gallery, but you can see that, yeah, they go off the edge, it's beyond. And I like to think of painting. A painting is a snapshot of one portion of this wonderful creative reality or internal expression that we're doing. It actually goes beyond those edges. And that's why it's great to have a cool place where you can make a mess, because I literally scrape paint off the edge of the canvas and get messes all over the floor. Thank you for your questions, Marcia. That's fun. What else do you have? What other questions do you have?
There was a comment, Michael Madigan said, the older we get, the fewer mentors we have, in the sense of people more experienced and patient than we are, usually older people. We must look for mentors among talented, capable, and sympathetic people of all ages.
I think that's wonderful advice. Yeah, the thing that I'm just I don't know if it's not a counter, but a complimentary comment to that is I'm starting to, as I mentioned, my mentor kind of for painting and marketing, he just passed away. He was 79. But I'm also working to surround myself by younger people as mentors. So it's kind of reversing what I normally think of as mentoring. But as I showed you in my team picture, I've got people around me that are experts on digital social media marketing, on digital presence, on videos and storytelling and branding. And I'm studying that myself and knowing just enough to ask the right questions to be a part of that community and keep learning. But I'm also trying to be smart enough to realize I don't have to be smart at everything, and that I can lean on mentors, I can lean on other resources, I can make connections through a community that can be helpful. But Michael's comments are spot on.
I wants to also know, do you have any more reinventions left in you, like performance art or sculpting or?
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear you, Richard.
Someone wanted to know, do you have any more reinventions left in you?
Oh my, I think I've got dozens. And it could be in other art forms. Maybe I'll end up picking up a musical instrument and really taking off with it someday. It's funny, I even reinvent because of where I live. So last year I lived in Corktown and embraced that. Now I'm in the Eastern Market. So place and process and person and painting, I think there's a lot of chances there. And I obviously couldn't talk through all my reinventions on the slides. I try to keep it to things relevant to art, but I found that, I grew up way out in West Michigan, a little country boy, kind of this generic community away from everybody. And one of the first things I reinvented myself was to, move into an urban environment. I, believe it or not, you may not be able to tell this by looking at me, but I used to be a street basketball player, and I would run the courts back in Grand Rapids, and kind of reinvented myself with a whole new set of friends there that were very different. Going to the factory for me was a reinvention. I was bound to be a college football player. I had quite a bit of, good schooling. I got, decent grades, although it's hard for my artist brain always to focus. But when I got to the factory and I saw the diversity of people, of ages, of culture, different points of view, people from all over, I knew I was home. I knew that there was a place for me in that environment. And through my communications, even starting as a 17-year-old kid in the factory, I saw that I had influence and I had the ability to make things better by connecting people and working with others. I didn't know what that meant, but it turned into a whole career of really helping people come together and accomplish things that were to their benefit as well as the business's benefit.
Hi, Scott. This is Arlinda. How you doing?
Hi there.
Good, good. I came in at like 1:04, so you may have answered this question, but what were the elements that made your industrial series industrial?
Oh, that's a great question. And I would say that I'm probably only a third of the way into it. I assembled that wonderful team that I showed you a picture of, and they challenged me to think about what's my year going to look like. And I said, well, that's not how this art thing works. I'm just intuitive and I play. And if a gallery says, Scott, do you have some stuff? I have a lot of inventory. I have all this stuff to share. But my team said, what is it you're going to purposely do throughout the year? We did a strategic planning session. And I said, I had an epiphany. Most of my best thinking happens about 2 or 3 in the morning when the world doesn't have expectations of us and you're just kind of on your own with your thinking. So I had this epiphany that says, what I really want to do is maybe every 3 months, I do something big. And Misha, you may know Misha McGlone from the Irwin House Gallery. She helped me refine it a little bit and think about the timing of it. But the idea was to take the first quarter, and I had a little medical setback, so my timing isn't just right, but the first quarter is working title Industrial Forces, so all about factory. The next quarter is going to be Urban Forces, so all the ways that the city and the vibe, the architecture and everything affects. The next one is going to be Natural Forces, working title. And the last one, towards the end of the year, is going to be Internal Forces. So picture just what I did there: industrial, urban, natural, internal. It becomes less about things and structures and more about me as a person. So there might be by the end of the year, I might be doing abstracted self-portraits. I may be creating energy that's more involved with the healing process that we all need to do, that we've all had tough times. We have cracks, we have various breaks. So it's going to become very, very personal. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, I'm actually surprised how the factory stuff is personal. So I'm going to develop this large body of work. We'll end up curating into something that I think will be powerful and exciting for people to see. But that's where the factory series was spawned out of. Great question. Thank you. What other questions do we have? Karika, we're getting close to 2. Is that a hard cutoff, or we just hang out until we lose energy? Because I don't lose energy very quickly.
I see that, and I'm very inspired by that. We have time for one more question.
Okay, super.
I just want to say how much I appreciated this presentation. You know, the things that you've shared are just so universal and can be applied to anyone. You'd be an inspiration to children as well as older adults. And I just want to thank you for the time that you've given us today. Just absolutely wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I support that. Very
Me too. Yes.
inspiring. Yes. But when you closed just a few moments ago and you went to the factory, okay, my mind went to the DIA, to Rivera and his factory. I mean, you know, you're giving us fast forward a long time. And I'm not comparing you to Rivera, you know, but thank you for reminding us about the connection between the personal and the factories of our world.
Yeah, thank you very much. I recently just went to the DIA with a fellow artist who's been spending studio time with me, Dr. Sean Renee, who some of you probably know. And yeah, I was immersed there in that big area looking at it. I'm just wowed by that. But yeah, there's a whole people aspect of it and how we approach it, who it is, how it becomes a part of us. And that's what I'm going to express through this series.
Very exciting. Look forward to it.
Hi, Scott. It's Misha.
Hi there. Oh, you're on the call. I just mentioned you.
I know. Thank you for the shout out. That was pretty cool. Okay, and you may have covered this earlier, but in speaking with a lot of emerging artists, a lot of them seem to have a challenge dividing their creative time with whether it's work or, you know, school. So what advice would you have for artists who are juggling between work and creative time?
Stop having friends and relationships and just paint all the time. No, just kidding. Yeah, I face that a lot. You know, we all are given, 24 hours in a day. And I would say that taking a hard self look and objectively looking at what your calendar looks like and what it is. For me, I gave up things like television. I don't have regular TV, certain things that I had to trim a little bit and cut there. But, if it's a priority, and this goes for relationships too, right? If it's a priority for us, we likely can find a way. And so thinking about structure, and I travel for business. I have a pretty intense job. I'm overseeing transformations across many different organizations. I think that making it a priority, doing the things sometimes that are uncomfortable, and many of you may use analogies to working out or other things that you have in your life. To me, it's useful to create triggers and routines. The way that our behaviors and habits come, it's useful to, whether it's 5 o'clock, it's time to put on my painterly clothes. Let me switch my shoes. Those are little triggers. Let me have social accountability of inviting somebody else to my studio with me. Now I'm more likely to go. But I think there's a lot of little hooks and little tricks and experiments, as well as a good objective look at your calendar and what you focus on. So I used to run United Way campaigns for large organizations and do a lot. I still try to do quite a bit with the community, but I used to do these big events, and I had one of the presidents of one of the companies I work with simply say it this way: I can tell what you care about by looking at your checkbook and looking at your calendar. And if you let that resonate with you for a minute, think about how much time, now, and I'm not talking about genuine refresh, the quiet time and rest that we need, but sometimes we get caught up in mindless activities that aren't really, serving our vision, our purpose, and helping. So, maybe we take a look at those in our calendar. Where do we spend our money? And I think it's another example, Misha, to think about when I was describing the team. Mm-hmm. I could get caught up in cleaning brushes, there's certain things you need to get help with, certain things you need to delegate. There's certain things you need to decide not to do. So it's, do you start something? Do you stop something? Or do you transform it somehow? Stop, start, transform is a useful way of thinking about all of our tasks and the important stuff that we've got going to make sure that what we're doing aligns with our vision and priorities. And just one final thought. I know, Carrick, I may have gone a little long here, but the idea of articulating where you want to go is really, really important, or what this means for me, or the ever important point of why do I paint, or why do I, do whatever it is you want to do. If you deeply dig into your why, you'll find the motivation and you'll figure out the how if you know the why. So I know that I want to paint, I want to express, I want to build community, I want to make art accessible, I want to lift up other artists, I want to create some positive energy, I want to reinvent, I want to transform. And because of that, probably a little easier to get in my car and drive the 7 minutes, which seems daunting, crazy enough at times, but to get there, to go paint. And then usually once I'm in the space, that's another part of it, create a space that inspires you, so that once you get the trigger to get there, then you don't want to leave. And let music and other things make that energy come to keep making it better and better, expressing more of yourself. We're all these wonderful individuals. Nobody can do what we can do. We need to be able to express that and bring energy, and know that in many cases, there's an audience for that and energy, and we just need to be willing to be vulnerable and share.
Nice.
Well, I couldn't have said it better myself. And what a great note to end on, I am just so thankful to Scott McDuffie for sharing. And I see a lot of messages in the chat, people very appreciative, truly enjoyed this talk today. So thank you so much, Scott.
You're welcome.
And thank you so much to Richard Reeves at Hannon, and to all of our amazing guests. I'm always delighted to hear the phenomenal questions you have to ask at these talks as well. And we will be here again next month with another featured artist. Next month is Sydney Camp, and we're doing it 1 week earlier to avoid doing it on Mother's Day, because we want to be sure to set aside time to acknowledge all the wonderful mothers in our lives. But thank you again so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.